Hi everyone, it is of course Dr. Julie. I hope you're having a really lovely Monday. Hope you're not succumbing to so much of what's going around right now. I wanted to pop in here because I've been thinking a lot about how many people have either been diagnosed with or feel that they have signs and symptoms of an autoimmune disease. It is becoming more and more common that people will say, I do have at least one diagnosed autoimmune condition, whether that's Hashimoto's, whether it's rheumatoid or lupus or scleroderma or any number of other conditions. And so many people have become so accustomed to it that it's odd, but it's not even raising eyebrows anymore. And yet, so much of what's out there is insufficient to deal with the problem. It is not offering real solutions and not really doing much different one plan to another. Many times when I'm talking to people and I get told, yes, I have this autoimmune disease and I've been following an autoimmune diet or an autoimmune protocol diet. And this is one of those points that I have a real issue with. Because in an absence of real solutions, the medical community, naturopathic, functional, holistic, they've adopted a protocol basis of just eliminating every possible immune negative substance that they can think of, which is a really strange approach because ultimately that's not changing how our cells function. And as evidence to that, I find very many people go on these protocols. They eliminate every antigenic food. And then they discover over the following few years that not only have they avoided those foods, but now they have to start avoiding others. Or they have mystery symptoms that add to their current picture, but they can't figure out where they're coming from. Or they start to have sensitivities to supplements, which is another common thing I'm seeing more and more. And people have to keep cutting and cutting and cutting more and more foods, more and more substances, to the point where I've had people come to me and work with me with a list of, 20 foods that they don't tolerate. They're relegated almost to a few kinds of greens, maybe some beef, maybe chicken, although chicken often goes by the wayside because even from a Chinese medicine perspective, that can be a difficult food at best. It's also quite honestly dirty. It's hard to find chicken that really isn't contaminated, but they're relegated to a few things and their diet becomes really boring. Now, to me, this sign that people go through all this trouble, they avoid all these foods, and then they keep having more and more foods added to that list of things that they don't tolerate, is a key indicator that the core problem has not been solved. And the core problem, which is not spoken about, I feel, at all sufficiently in medicine, is that chronic stress response has relegated your cells to low energy states. Now, I know you've all heard me say this, but I really feel like it can't be said enough, because taking away your inflammatory foods does not necessarily heal the elevated stress response. In fact, it takes away an irritant. So it's kind of like if your muscle hurts and you don't use it, then the muscle doesn't hurt, right? But it's not changing the dramatic picture. It's not altering the future of your body, because the reality is taking away foods causes an initial reduction in inflammatory components, but it hasn't done anything to rebuild cell energy. Those are actually two different pathways. And yet, a lot of times the diet is just aimed at reducing the inflammatory process. It's not aimed at improving cell function. And as a result, people go years and years in these low energy states. So every time you add another food intolerance, it's another sign that you have a low energy state. So if you started out noticing, hey, I don't do so well with wheat, and then you take wheat out of your diet, and then a few years pass and you think, I seem to be having trouble with corn. So you take corn out of your diet. And then it's like, oh, sometimes when I eat chicken, it bothers me. Or when I drink milk, or when I eat cheese, or when I eat sugar, it bothers me. So I need to take those things out of my diet. And you have this rolling list. It's a classic sign and symptom that your vitality is dropping lower and lower and lower and lower. Now, in Chinese medicine terms, this is a vast deficiency of yang qi. So you don't have any fire. You don't have any inherent fire in your body, and it's just getting worse and worse. And let me tell you, yang qi is not replaced just by avoiding the irritants. You actually have to re-nourish it. You have to specifically bring that nourishment back in line. It also isn't replaced by giving huge amounts of quote unquote anti-inflammatory components. So this is the other thing I see where people will say, as long as I take my large doses of turmeric, I'm totally fine. I don't have pain. But you guys, that's not a solution. So turmeric is a COX-2 inhibitor, so it does act like the anti-inflammatory drugs on the market. But those aren't any more of a solution either. And just replacing a natural substance for a pharmaceutical one is not healing. It's just using the lesser of an evil substance for something less harmful that has less side effects. But it doesn't change the inherent picture. So adding turmeric will reduce the inflammatory components, but it does not raise the cell energy. It does not repair your mitochondria. It's not changing your cell membrane function. And there's a need to do both, but this is what's being missed. The same thing with a lot of people with autoimmune diseases are told, well, you definitely have an adrenal condition. FYI, every adult over 40 has an adrenal condition. That's not a unique piece of news, much like telling someone they have leaky gut is not a unique piece of news. And so putting people on, so I was just at the store the other day. This ties right in. I was at the health food store. There's some flashy full color thing for Gaia herbs. Stress doesn't leave you alone, so deal with it. Something. I don't remember what the words were, but in essence, they were selling their herbal adaptogens. And so they were promoting that as, of course, this is how you mitigate stress. Because like I said, everyone who's ever been told you have an autoimmune condition, you have an inflammatory condition, they're told, okay, so we need to deal with your adrenals because stress is a component. Giving you adaptogens does not turn off the stress response. It actually just feeds the adrenals, which is cool. But the stress response is more than the adrenals. The stress response is a high estrogen condition. It's in the liver. It deals with the thyroid. It's mitigating blood sugar. It's affecting calcium metabolism. It's affecting magnesium metabolism. It's affecting iron and copper movement and zinc movement. So just giving an adaptogen hasn't addressed all those other issues. And yet we're kind of given this false premise. Well, if you've taken away all your offending foods and you're taking the adaptogens, then you're dealing with the immunity issues and you should be doing much better. And for a while that may be true, but having been in practice for so long, what I've seen is that this avoidance technique and just let's nourish the adrenals technique, it doesn't result in permanent change. It results in alleviation of symptoms for a period of time, maybe improvement of life for a period of time, and then the return of more. So the question is, why are so many people missing the boat? I think on one hand, it's because it's not being taught this way. I wasn't taught medicine this way. And I went to one of the absolute best naturopathic schools in the country. And to top that off, I have, my Chinese medicine degree. So I have this whole other Eastern side of the picture. But it's also because I really feel like medicine has been influenced by the makers of supplements, but it's also that the doctors don't really know how to turn it off. They've been given one model, which is adrenal insufficiency or thyroid conditions, and they're not willing to really veer outside the realm of lab testing for thyroid conditions. So they kind of get stuck in that. And then the autoimmune diet has been popular forever. I mean, even back when I was in school. So the idea of just avoiding is kind of the predominant feature, even though our physiology would show that cutting and cutting and cutting isn't actually worth it because it tends to create more stress because our diet ends up so limited that not only did we develop kind of weird aversions to food and the rigidity is another form of stress, but we may be missing nutrients because we're not eating a wide variety of foods. And on top of that, the boredom with food makes, our diet kind of an adversarial concept. And we tend to miss out on the densely nourishing foods that actually can promote our biggest health return. And so by my approximation, we have so much autoimmune disease because we've never dealt with the fact that we're working on elevated stress that goes back, I think the real change in tide happened in the 1940s. And so I know that I'm a product of that. My parents were born in the 40s. So they were born into a decade where the stress picture changed. And then I was born a few decades after that. So I inherited the deficiencies that came with that on the heels of World War II. So epigenetically, I inherited those things from them, as did many of you, born within that spectrum. We're epigenetically inheriting a bigger and bigger template for stress. And in some people, that gets to the point where it reaches a breaking point. And then autoimmunity develops because the body can no longer send messages correctly because the confusion has set in. Now, 9 times out of 10, the core root of that is stress response and its effect on the thyroid, and as the way that the cells relate to thyroid, and predominantly liver function. And adrenals secondary, because the adrenals are more resilient. They will build themselves back up. On top of that, then we added in over the last 40 years or so, incredible toxicity in the food supply, in the water supply, and a vast toxicity in the last 20 years or so in our electromagnetic arena. And those are all things that really none of us are going to escape. I mean, if you live on a property where you're drinking well water, maybe. And if you're growing your own food, you're escaping part of it, but you're not escaping the atmospheric toxins that can't be avoided. And you're probably not escaping the wireless toxicity. So there are toxicities that none of us can avoid. Now, if we add to that, all of the other things, the complexities of modern day relationships, the job stress, the professional stress, and all of these things that have changed over the last 50 years pretty dramatically, we have this perpetual societal onslaught. Now, can we go change all of that immediately? No, we can't. I don't have a magic wand to tell you how to live a completely stress-free life. But we can take our body out of that stress adaptation phase using food and using proper replacement nutrition. And in doing so, we can help the body realign and turn off those immune responses that have gotten so haywire in the midst of craziness and stress. And then we can reverse autoimmune conditions. We can turn off those markers. But we don't do it by just trying to quiet them, by loading in, anti-inflammatories, by loading in those kind of things. We quiet them by turning off the stress response and giving the cells back the ability to be in charge. See, you have a divine template in your body. It is inherently, it wants to work. It knows all the right messages, but it's going to go with the predominant message. So if your cell response and if your brain response is constantly going yeah, I got to keep up, I got to stay on task. What about this? Oh my gosh, we're stuck in worry, which is an element of the spleen. We're stuck in anger, which is an element of the liver. We're stuck in fear, which is an element of the kidney. It's just a constant draining of your inherent reserves. And there isn't anything you can do about that until you turn that off. So trying to heal in the midst of that is absolutely insane, because eventually those problems will rear their heads as something else. And this is what I see people say, oh, no, I had joint pain, but I got that turned off with turmeric. And my adrenals were rough, but then as long as I take this adaptogen, I'm good. That's not healing. That's just quieting. Those are Band-Aid remedies. The truth is you should be able to eat and move with having to take very few things over the long term once your system is finally healed. But it's not going to happen by just piecemeal, putting it together, taking one pill after another, replacing pharmaceuticals with natural things. Now, it may be that you don't want to do that deep dive, and that's totally cool. Taking turmeric may mitigate your pain, and it's certainly better than taking ibuprofen. But if you think about what you really want in life and you think, I don't want to be burdened by health problems. I don't want to define myself as my autoimmune disease, because I see that a lot. People, one of the first words that come out of their mouth, when they're working with a healthcare professional is, well, I have Hashimoto's. It's like it's the other parts of their personality, or like the other person that just walked into the room with them. How wrong is it that we've become so accustomed to being sick that it's literally like, oh yeah, and this is my friend Hashimoto's, and we walk around together. Or my friend rheumatoid arthritis, my friend lupus. That's not a way to live. So the real root of all these conditions is these unremitted stress responses that are so poorly understood because people stopped at adrenal. They hear stress and they literally stop at adrenal. They stop at adrenal and B vitamins every single time. And I wish I could say it was different, but having worked with thousands upon thousands of people, I can tell you, I've seen treatment plans by other practitioners, and that is 90% of what it's based off. Autoimmune diets, anti-inflammatory diets, B vitamins, and adrenals, and some fish oil. That's like the gist of it. If you're ready to be done with that path, then it's time to turn off the stress response. heal the mitochondria, reinvigorate energy production, get the liver conjugating again, decrease those hyperestrogen levels in your tissues, get the copper out of your tissues, get the iron out of your tissues, clean your brain out, and actually get some healing done. But that is a multi-step process. That isn't done with like, just eat this one food or take this one supplement. And so that's where I can come in, because the whole life approach is my specialty. So if you really want to approach it that way, then you should reach out, because we can set up a plan that does that and work you through every step. But I just want you to know autoimmune conditions are on the rise, because this is the problem we're not dealing with. Ask around, see how many of your friends have diagnosed autoimmune conditions or think that they have an autoimmune condition. And I bet you many of them have already been trying a lot of these principles in their life and they're still dealing with it. There's a reason for that, and it's time to solve it. So hopefully this helps. I at least want you to have an understanding of what you're dealing with and why so many people are so sick, and know that there is no like magic wand approach. There's no magic pill. There's no eat these 3 superfoods and it all gets cured diet, because our body's way too magical for that. I mean, you are living in the most divinely inspired structure ever created. And healing has to take that divinity into understanding and recognize the language communication between all these beautiful parts, instead of working piecemeal on the part that we think is most quote unquote inflamed or most out of balance. All right, guys, have an absolutely beautiful day. Blessings.